on this episode of Rebel Spirit Radio.
Why don't we try meditating with the tree? Neither of
Hmm.
us had ever done that before, but we knew Buddha had. He sat with the Bodhi tree for 49 days and became
Yeah.
enlightened. And I never thought the Bodhi tree was part of that. Now I do. Trees
Hmm.
put out a bioelectric field, an energy field. It's incredibly soothing to our nervous systems. And so we come into a sort of resonance that helps us expand our consciousness, our awareness, and our perceptivity. That certainly happened to me and continues to happen. And I think it's kind of limitless because
Hmm.
nature and this beautiful earth we live on and this cosmos is vast.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I am joined by author Ellen Dee Davidson to discuss her book, Sacred Forest Bathing. Ellen explains the concept of forest bathing and its remarkable healing benefits. We explore the broader themes of reconnecting with nature, the divine feminine, and the critical need for balance between technology and the natural world, emphasizing nature's intelligence and the importance of developing a respectful, intimate relationship with the land. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. Your support is truly appreciated. Ellen Dee Davidson has worked as a creative writing, piano, and elementary school teacher, and is the author of a number of children's books, including Wind, which won the Nautilus Gold Award, and The Miracle Forest. She is a member of Tree Sisters, Awakening Women, and the Earth Treasure Vase Global Healing Project. She joins me today to discuss her book, Sacred Forest Bathing. Ellen, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Looking forward to this. I am intrigued by forest bathing, and I enjoyed your book and how personal it was. And I thought that a good place to begin would be with forest bathing itself. What is it for anyone who may not have ever heard that term? And then I also want to ask you your personal story because you found this forest bathing activity to be a source of healing. So that's our starting point, I think. And then we can get into some more of the details of the book.
Okay, forest bathing might be my favorite thing to talk about. I had never heard the term when I first started forest bathing. I think the Japanese were already researching it, and they call it Shinrin-Yoku, and have proven that there's all kinds of healing benefits from
Mm.
spending time in forests. For me, my call to forest bathing happened in two ways. One, I started having dreams when I moved into this house 32
Mm.
years ago. There's an old growth redwood behind my house. And this tree would come into my dreams almost nightly for years. The tree still visits me in my dreams. At that time, it was inconceivable to me that a tree would have any consciousness or sentience or be able to communicate with me in dreams. So I analyzed the dreams, wrote them down as this tree represents this part of
Mm.
me. I don't think that anymore. I think the tree
Mm.
actually has been visiting and teaching me in my dreams. So then the second way that I got into forest bathing was I was involved with a Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana group and meditating a lot. And the Lama suggested to us that we follow the juice.
Mm.
And I interpreted that to mean that we followed what we loved and what our heart's desire and calling was. Him saying that coincided with my youngest daughter heading off to college. So I had a little more time than usual. And on free days, I would wake up and play a game with myself. I would ask myself, what do I want to do today? And it kept being go to the forest. So that's how I stumbled into forest bathing.
Okay. And so forest bathing itself, is it
just going out into the forest? It's just being in nature? Or is there a little bit more to it, like mindset, for example?
There's definitely more to forest bathing than just being in the forest, although that, or a natural environment. There's also nature therapy in any kind of wild place. But forest bathing is a combination of mindfulness while being in the forest. And so it's essential to unplug phones and
Mm,
music and practice silence if you're with other people, maybe separate a little bit out so there's space around each person and really tune in through the senses to expand our awareness to connect as much as possible with the environment.
okay. And one of the things that I kind of initially asked you about, because my understanding is, as you've noted, the Japanese have been kind of researching this and have found that being in a forest has positive effects on our health. And this is something that you have experienced as well. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk just a little bit about the experience you had of how forest bathing helped heal you of a few things.
Okay, I'll start back when my first daughter was born. She was colicky and wouldn't sleep. And somehow going through that experience with her scrambled my own ability to sleep. And I ended up with severe insomnia for the first time in my life, and it never went away. And that cascaded into fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chemical sensitivities, catching every cold that came down the pike. So I wasn't well. I had tried everything, acupuncture, hypnotherapy. I went to counselors, tried some medications that didn't work, and I juiced everything. I had tried anything that came down the pipe. Nothing worked, and I had just decided I would have to live without enough sleep and not feeling too well most of the time. So when I went, meditation was one of the things I was trying. So I was in that Buddhist group meditating, but even that wasn't helping me sleep. And so when I went to the forest, I had no expectation of healing. I just liked being there. It was beautiful and I could walk and I would sit with the trees. But slowly I started noticing I'm sleeping better. I can turn my neck. I'm happy. I feel good. And now I'm 71 and I feel great. So
Yeah,
it worked.
yeah,
Finally
yeah.
found something that worked.
Yeah, yeah. I had a similar experience. I've also had sleep problems, but kind of to set the stage. So you're in Northern California, and
Mhm.
you get to hike amongst those glorious redwoods. I lived in Southern California for quite a while, and I was mostly in Pasadena. And I developed a practice of, and I considered it a practice, and I considered it a kind of a spiritual practice of I hiked every week, and I know that you go to different places, and we'll kind of talk about that in some of the trees. But I made a conscious choice to hike the same trail every week because I wanted to develop a relationship to the land.
Mhm.
And that's something that you've written about, the importance of, I guess, to bond deeply with the land where we are is kind of how you write it. And
Mhm.
I called it my Friday office because I would go on Fridays. And I desperately miss my Friday office. But let me ask you about the relationship to the land that you've developed while going through this developing. I'm just going to call it a practice because I think that's what it is. So if you
Mhm.
could talk a little bit about the changes. You already mentioned how you had never thought about trees as being, sentient or conscious before, but now you
Mhm.
do. So yeah, if you could just say a little bit about our relationship to the land.
It's like a relationship with people. You could meet someone awesome and you just hit it off, but to really become intimate and close requires repeatedly getting together and knowing people in all types of situations. And that's how I feel about the land. I want to know a place in all weathers, all moods, all phases of the moon. And it becomes deeper and more intimate. And, most of us have a bucket list, places we'd like to see. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think some of the belonging that we're missing is to develop deep relationships with place.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is it, I don't think it would be wrong to say that this is also something that helps nurture a kind of spirituality. And if I'm wrong on that, please correct me. But it's something that is very interesting to me is this connection between nature and spirit.
Well, nature created us. We
Mm,
didn't create nature, and nature is vast and incredibly intelligent. Our scientists keep finding out more and validating what mystics have experienced. And a lot of my direct experience, when I jumped into this odyssey of going to the forest, I thought most of it was my imagination or fantasy because it I couldn't really believe it. One thing that happened at the very beginning, I was hiking with a friend in the forest and we sat down to have lunch. And then she said, "Why don't we try meditating with the tree?" Neither of
mm,
us had ever done that before, but we knew Buddha had. He sat with the Bodhi tree for 49 days and became
yeah.
enlightened. And I never thought the Bodhi tree was part of that. Now I do. Trees
Mm,
put out a bioelectric field, an energy field. It's incredibly soothing to our nervous systems. And so we come into a sort of resonance that helps us expand our consciousness, our awareness, and our perceptivity. That certainly happened to me and continues to happen. And I think it's kind of limitless because
mm,
nature and this beautiful earth we live on and this cosmos is vast.
mm. Yeah, yeah, it is. It's very vast. Let's talk a little bit about your trees or the trees that you have developed relationships with. You talked about the tree that's at the back of your house. Now, is that grandmother dragon tree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, why don't we introduce the viewers and listeners to some of these amazing characters that you have developed relationships with?
Grandmother Dragon Tree looks like a dragon, and so my children named her the Dragon Tree. She has kind of a snout sticking out at the top and a really spiky bare branch top, and so she looks like a dragon. She's the one that first came to me in dreams and was this is before Suzanne Simard and all those scientists found out the importance of the fungi and the mycelium
Mm,
in trees communicating through chemical messengers. Now they know that, but when I was having these dreams 32 years ago, I'd never heard anything like that. And the tree kept showing me mushrooms and fungi, and I was like, why? And the other thing the tree would show me is this energy coming down as if the tree were an antenna funneling cosmic energy into the earth and earth energy up, and then had this radius that was at least a quarter to a half a mile radius of energetic influence. The tree would show me the different animals and creatures that lived there, and I've seen a lot of them with my physical eyes too. So Grandmother Dragon Tree was sort of an introduction into a relationship with a being. I don't know, you can't tell exactly how old these ancient redwoods
mm,
are until they die because you have to look at tree rings. And sometimes they're bigger because of more wet years, they expand more. But probably she's around 1,000 years old.
wow.
So this is, and some of the redwoods on the coast are 2 or 3,000 years old. In the forests I go, the sequoias up in the Sierra Nevada mountains can be 5,000 years old. So these trees on the coast were here when the dinosaurs were here. They're just holding frequencies that are ancient.
Hmm. So before we look at some of the other trees, and I don't know if you can give a good answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. So grandmother dragon tree began appearing in your dreams, and you said at first you were, when I think in the book you said you were taking more kind of like a Jungian approach, where it's like,
Mm.
yes, this represents a part of me. When was it? Was there anything that really clicked for you at some point where you're like, wait a minute, I don't think that's right. I think it's actually the tree. Or was it a more of a gradual process?
When my dad was a mathematician and I was raised with science as God, so I invalidated this for years. It just was beyond my frame of reference. We've heard those stories about how the Native American people that saw the ships at sea, some of them couldn't see them because they couldn't imagine that such a thing as a clipper ship existed. Well, that's how I was with this. It was so outside of the box I was in that it took me years. And I think when I started to open up more was actually when I started to read some of the science. There's an old classic called, I think it's The Secret Life of Plants. It's a
Hmm.
really old book,
Yeah.
but it talked about these studies where someone can plan on cutting or pruning back a house plant, and they only have to have the thought. And the plant would, they put electrodes on the leaves of the plant. The plant would send out an electrical scream. So when I started to run into some of that information, I started thinking, well, maybe. And now there's so much
Yeah.
information out
Yeah.
about the way trees communicate with each other. The Institute of Heart Math is doing a tree human interconnectivity study, and they
Hmm.
just did this great research with red maples where people sent love and gratitude and appreciation to the trees, and those trees expanded their ambient electromagnetic field significantly, hugely. Their auras got bigger. So
Yeah.
we are in relationship. The plants and trees made this planet inhabitable for us. We wouldn't even be here without them. So it's a relationship, and
Hmm.
I'm sure the plants haven't cut off from the relationship. We humans have. And so now we need to become more conscious and explore this.
Yeah. Well, and it seems in a way that grandmother dragon tree was offering you an invitation, that it was maybe there was like some kind of intention because you're like nearby human. And it's like, okay, let's say hi. Let's just say hi.
Exactly. I think that is exactly what happened. And it's an ongoing relationship. But if you don't mind, I'd like to skip
Yeah.
forward to summer tree.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because you've got several trees here. So let's talk about summer tree.
So the quantum leap into really believing this didn't happen with grandmother dragon tree for me. What happened was when my friend Annette and I were on a hike and we stopped and ate lunch under this beautiful redwood tree. And she suggested, why don't we try meditating here? And we both sat and meditated. And then 40 minutes in, quiet and spacious, I suddenly heard, come back. I thought she'd said it. The words were so loud. I opened my eyes and I said, Annette, did you just tell me to come back? No, no, she hadn't said anything. I looked around. Was there anyone else around? No, we hadn't seen anybody all day. So then I was like, that is strange. And I thought it was the tree that had told me to come back. Now, I don't think trees speak English. I don't think the tree spoke and said, come back. But I think what happened is the tree sent a message that my brain interpreted into words and an auditory hallucination or whatever. So I walked out with Annette talking about this weird thing that had happened to me, determined to come back. And I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My husband was
Mm.
busy. My two best friends were busy. So that was when I first experimented with going alone. So I hiked out to the tree thinking I'd only go back once. I've been going back now for 17 years.
Wow.
And the relationship just continues to become more and more intimate and beautiful. And that tree has been a big part of my healing and perceptual expansion.
Okay. Yeah. What are some of the, I guess, lessons that you've learned from, we can say, either grandmother dragon tree or summer tree? And there are other trees that I'd like to ask you about as well. But it seems, I mean, do you think that they are our teachers?
I think all of nature is our teachers. And if I had to say the one biggest lesson I've learned is to listen.
Hmm.
We humans, we're so full of ourselves and we're self-important. And because of that, we've cut ourselves off and so we're lonely.
Hmm.
But this is a really interconnected, interactive, interrelated, and probably universe. And when we listen and open up, we can tap into more of the unified field where there's
Hmm.
just so much guidance and guidance on how to heal ourselves, heal, and also as we heal and heal our environment because the earth
Yeah.
knows balance, knows how to
Hmm.
heal.
Yeah. Yeah, you wrote something that is what I'm always saying in a sense, which is, I'm just going to read the sentence here. If we're going to restore ourselves and quit destroying the land, we have to reunite with the feminine aspects of ourselves and each other and give them the honor and respect that they deserve. That wasn't actually what I was just thinking of, but I do want to talk about that, kind of the bringing back the divine feminine. But it was another sentence I had written down. I thought that one kind of was leading into this one, was how we treat our bodies is similar to how we treat nature. And I always operate off of the old Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. And that what we're seeing in the world is a reflection of us. And when we look at all of the environmental crises that we're facing, that's a reflection of us.
Mhm.
And I like this idea, of that we have to restore ourselves. And part of that restoration is creating a relationship with the divine feminine. Do you think that the trees, you received a calling from a tree. Do you think that they're calling to all of us and we just can't hear them?
I think more and more people are hearing them, but yes, absolutely. I think the trees in particular, they've been on the planet for 400 million years, and at the most, humans have been here for 6 million, depending on what qualifies as a human.
Right.
Homo sapiens way less.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they're intelligent, conscious, big beings. They're slower, and yet my sense is they vibrate higher than we do. So in
Mm,
order to connect, we need to slow down, which is something our nervous systems are desperate for. We
mm.
didn't evolve to live at the pace we're living at right now, with
Yeah.
so much coming in all the time.
Yeah, we didn't. And, you're right. Our origins go back a long, long, long way, but Homo sapiens have not been on the scene all that long. And the world that we live in now is, if we look at the timeline, it's just a blink of an eye. And, we aren't prepared for all the technology and everything that we've designed and created. But let's talk a little bit about the feminine, because that's something that I agree with. And what would you say is the importance of this, and how does that fit in with the natural world?
That's a good question. Well, first off, I want to say that for both men and women, we've devalued the qualities that we consider feminine, the
Mm,
nurturing, the nourishment, the receptivity. We're also busy sort of projecting ourselves out in the world and the activity and more of those sacred masculine qualities, which are great. There's nothing wrong with that. But when they're out of balance, we end up with an out of balance world. And that's what we have right now after thousands of years of patriarchy. So, and you can see it the way mothering is devalued and preschool teaching is devalued. And we don't pay a lot to people that go into professions like nursing and caretaking and elder care, but we're starving for these qualities. And so everyone needs this. We all need to be held and nourished and listened to and loved and cared for in these ways. And because we base our value so much on what we pay for, economic dollar value. So a lot of women want independence, of course. So we've jumped into the workforce in a pretty male way. And what really needs to happen is we need to change what we value and pay for those things, or maybe we won't always be on a money system, but well, we are. And in the same way, we've devalued nature and looked at nature as just something we use. I mean, it's just here for us to exploit, use, and everything's resources. It's not vital and alive with, and that's changing now. Now we're having rivers get rights as people, and and that's a beautiful, and of course, all of our ancient ancestors had holy wells, holy trees, holy mountains. The Native American people still have that. And so we have people living on the planet that can guide us back to a more reverent relationship. And the earth will respond. I guess one of the things I want to share is this miracle. I wrote a kid's book called The Miracle Forest that tells the true story of a community in Colombia that couldn't get anything to grow. And they finally got tropical Caribbean pine trees to grow. And then this miracle happened, shaded in the understory, rainforests that biologists thought hadn't been in the area for 30,000 years, spontaneously regenerated and brought back 260 species. And for me, this is just a real happening example of how when we work with nature and try and cooperate, the healing miracles and potential that nature can provide are beyond our imaginations. They will look like miracles. So I don't think it's quite as hopeless with the climate issues we're facing as sometimes we're told.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's always a question that I ask. And I was thinking, and I haven't asked it in a long time, but often when I have a guest and we're talking about environmental things, I always like to ask at the end, well, do you have hope? And you just answered that question. That, yes, you have hope.
I have lots of hope.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. I think that we need hope. Hope is important. Yeah. And, one of the things that it kind of came to my mind as you were speaking, about the feminine, the divine feminine, is that it's absolutely true that our culture, and I'm using culture here as a very broad, kind of Western culture, which is also broad, that we've devalued the feminine. We've devalued the traditional kind of feminine roles. And we hear a lot, it's like, the nastiness of patriarchy and everything. And I totally am on board with that. And that there are these masculine qualities that we've accepted as better, or primary. But I was also thinking, I'm like, well, but it seems to me that what we also need in conjunction with this is a reimagining of the divine masculine in a sense. I'm thinking in terms of, we need to, the green man or reawaken Pan or something like that. And it seems like, you've got the quote in the book. I'm going to correct you. It's Thoreau. And the quote is actually, in wildness is the preservation of the world. A lot of people always put it as wilderness, but it's in wildness.
And that's different too. I like it better. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that that's something that you're tapping into when you're holding these conversations and developing relationships with trees and the land. It's a way of sort of rewilding ourselves.
You know, I'm going to share a perception. While you were talking about Pan, I
Mm.
totally saw this Pan energy come right through you. It's like a Pan right there.
Okay.
And that was beautiful. Sophie Strand wrote a beautiful book about the sacred
uh,
masculine,
mm-hmm.
the flowering wand, and
Yeah.
that comes to mind. And absolutely, we need the balance. It's not like either is wrong, and both are wrong when they're out of balance.
Yeah.
So, but we have devalued the feminine qualities, the divine feminine, and we're hungry for them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, speaking of the divine feminine, one of the aspects of the book that you talk about a little bit, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, the Ellen of the Ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Well, we share a name, only she only has one
Yeah.
L. So I was drawn to her, and she is a European kind of goddess figure who represented the feminine and sort of saved her people with the Roman invasions. Although, because this Roman Emperor Marcus was had dreamed about her, and
Mm,
he wanted to unite with her, and she had terms and conditions for him to do that. And she was a forest goddess. Indo-European cultures have a lot of forest goddess mythology, and I think we have a sense of forests. I know forests have been demonized in a lot of fairy tales and
mm,
movies as big scary places, but I think if you go far enough back in mythology, we saw forests as shelter and
mm.
protection, just like most little animals do. I know personally when I'm in the forest, I feel incredibly protected and sheltered.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a history to the idea of wilderness, and so much of it, I think, is kind of wrapped up in sort of theological terms in many ways, because when Adam and Eve, from the Western Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, you have that story of the fall, that we are in this Eden, which is cultivated, it's a garden, it's cultivated, and they were sent out into the wilderness, and that's the place where the wild things live. And
Mm,
there's this sort of fear element and this idea that there's no society, that there's no culture, there's no moral grounding, that we can get kind of lost and confused in the wilderness. And it's where, all of the, not just the wild things live, but the dark forces. And so it seems like there's part of this story is this, this inherent kind of badness to it that's simply not true. And what we try to do is we try to cultivate and control those wild places. And it seems like part of what we need to do is exactly what you've been doing, is go out into the wild and realize, hey, this isn't all that bad. Even if something happens it's a little bit scary, we can deal with it. You have this story about you and your friend hiking, and I forget exactly what happened, but you ended up being out after dark and your cell phone light died, and you were waiting for you forgot the flashlights and whatnot. And I imagine that was kind of frightening, but at the same time, you persevered. You made it through.
yeah, I want to backtrack and say that was brilliant about this idea of it being scary to go from the cultivated garden to the wilderness. I hadn't thought of it that way, and I love
Mm.
it. So thank you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then when we're in places that have never been altered by human beings, been allowed to grow their own wild ways, we can find the wild, free places in ourselves.
Mm.
There's a resonance that happens. And ditto for when I'm in an unspoiled forest, there's a sense of integrity and wholeness. And honestly, I felt a wholeness within me that I'd never felt before. And so this, the other thing that I wanted to point out is that as you were speaking, I was thinking of how much we project out our fears.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always more afraid of things that aren't familiar. And in our modern life, we don't live in wilderness the way almost all of our ancestors did. So it's become unknown, it's unfamiliar. Therefore, that becomes scary. And then we project our own fears and our own shadow into that. That is not what I have found there. I have
Yeah.
had 5 mountain lion encounters, which is scary. The story you're telling is about the rutting elk, which was scary.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I've run into black bears, and not quite in the redwoods, I haven't, but in other places inland, I've run into rattlesnakes. The animals really aren't out to get us. They will if you startle or surprise them or get in the way of their offspring, their babies. But by far the most dangerous thing I do when I go out to spend a day is the drive up there.
Mm.
There's only 5% of the old growth redwoods left, so I have to drive half an hour north or south to get to unspoiled forest.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the most dangerous thing I do.
Yeah. Yeah, when let me ask you this. This is something that I don't know that you address it in the book. I don't remember, excuse me, if you've addressed this in the book, but in regards to the animals that you've encountered, the mountain lions, the elk, even the rattlesnake, what lessons have you learned from them?
Gratitude and respect.
Mm.
For example, the snake. How amazing that the snake coils up and rattles instead of biting me,
Yeah.
generously giving me a warning.
Mm-hmm.
The elk, it was just so, it was so beautiful to watch how this 1,200 pound huge animal with a rack of antlers that stretched out for feet off of its head was so protective of the rutting and the coming babies. That was this elk's job. And he was taking it so seriously. So even though I was scared and getting out of the way, he didn't hurt me. He could have. He just
Mm.
herded me away. And I admired that. That was an example of the sacred masculine
Mm.
protecting.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just beautiful. The mountain lion, one time I had this encounter where I came around a bend. I had the high ground and the mountain lion was below me. And we stared in each other's eyes. And this lion wasn't going to go anywhere. And I tried to slowly back up and look large and do all those things you're supposed to do. And it was just such an encounter with an intelligence and a power that was so foreign.
Mm.
And again, that lion could have pounced on me or hurt me, but it really wasn't after me. It was just an encounter. And so definitely respect is something I've learned.
Yeah. It also seems to be that it's a reminder, especially with mountain lions, because they can cause, they can be lethal, that there's this reminder in a sense that we're animals too, and that we're not necessarily top of the chain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, there's a certain joy in seeing wild animals. I mean, I do not prefer to run into mountain lions, and I now
Right.
have a bear bell, so I make noise and I sing, so I hardly ever see them anymore. This was at the beginning. But
Right.
but there's a certain joy that we're not alone on
Mm.
Earth. Probably my happiest wild animal encounter was this one day where I was sitting by a beautiful emerald pool in a creek and I was playing my wooden recorder, and 3 otters came and hung out with me for like 40 minutes, flipping and doing a little show and kind of water dancing to the music. And it was just so heartwarming.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Being in nature can bring us much joy if we open ourselves to it, I think. And I think that the other animals will sense that and come and play with us in their joy.
Mhm.
Now, I've not encountered in my hikes. I I'm in Colorado now, so now it's actually a little bit scarier going out hiking,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where you go, because there are, like California, there aren't grizzly bears in California, but I think there may be some big grizzly bears here. I may be wrong on that, but there's definitely mountain lions,
Yeah.
and probably more than where I was in Southern California. I had a bear bell too, but I stopped using it because I thought, mountain lion would just see me as like a kitty toy and just start, kind of batting me around.
That's a possibility. Oh, now I'm going to be more scared.
Yeah, but I did the same thing that you did. Is you sang, and I would chant sometimes. There's some really good Buddhist chants. So I would do that when I was out hiking. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the. See if there's anything you can add about some of these other trees. I was in particular interested in ancestor tree.
That's a really powerful tree. It has a lot of burls growing out of it, and the burls like make figures that look like different animals and Buddhas and all kinds of things. That tree wasn't interested in me. The trees have different personalities, and some of them, I don't know what they're doing, but they don't want to interact with me. They're probably busy talking to the stars. And so for a long time, that tree wasn't interested in me, but it was such an amazing place to sit that I would still go there and sit. And then this one time, the first time the tree ever sort of interacted with me, I went on a spontaneous shamanic journey. I'm not a shaman. I knew what that was because I'd gone to a shaman a few times and had a lot of rattling and drumming, and we'd gone to the underworld and the upper world and met animal guides and done those things. So I recognized it when suddenly, spontaneously, the tree was taking me down deep through her roots. And what happened was I had a vision, a really vivid one, like watching a movie, just really vivid. And I was taken back to my maternal line is Celtic, and I was taken back. I don't know if it was 8 generations or 800 years ago, but eight was in it. I was taken way back, and I met this ancient ancestress around an oak tree on the cliffs by the sea in Ireland. And she was wanting to reconnect with me some of the nature priestess magic from my lineage that we lost over time. And honestly, I think it worked because I have been opened up more to communication and communion and energetic transmissions out in nature since then. I've gone back many, many, many times to that tree, and that's never happened again. I wish it
Hmm.
would. It was
Yeah.
amazing. But so far, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk to the trees and the trees speak to you, you've got these listed in the books. I would imagine that there's probably more than what you've written about.
Yeah, there's only so much you can put
Yeah.
in a book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I was trying to make myself not sound crazy.
Yeah.
So I left out the stuff that was so wacky and out there that people would really think I was nuts.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think that a lot of people still unfortunately have this idea of, as you noted, that, we tend to think of nature, and there's a history to it, as, just dead, lifeless stuff that we can use to make things. And as soon as we start saying, no, trees are alive, and suggesting that maybe there may be kind of a consciousness to them, a lot of people think that in itself is a little bit out there. But yet, there's a pedigree to it. It's something that, as you pointed out in the book, is it's a very old worldview. You noted the Greeks and their ideas, like of dryads, and that they saw nature as, this is the quote, intelligent, alive, and holy.
Yeah. And that's cross-cultural and pretty much around the world. There are actually forest goddesses in most of the cultures around the world, and they pop up and they have similar qualities with
Mm.
of knowing the herbs and the plants. And One of the things that I think now, I don't think our ancestors did trial and error totally to figure out which plants and herbs and mushrooms were safe to eat.
Mm,
I think that might have been part of it, but I think a
mm,
lot of it was they were just guided in this
mm.
communion with the plants.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was on a different interview, and I'm trying to, oh, it was Barb Crowley, Beyond the Veil. And she was telling me that she interviewed a biologist or botanist who said that plants, if someone's sick, the right herbs and plants that are the antidote for that will spontaneously start growing around their
Oh,
house.
wow. Wow.
And I haven't seen any scientific studies for that, but there is way more relationship happening than we're
Yeah.
aware of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned before the Secret Life of Plants. I've got it on a bookcase right in front of me, um, and I remember hearing a radio interview, and this was a long time ago, and I think I've downloaded it somewhere. But this was in Los Angeles, where a scientist, a female scientist, had set up at an art museum. I think it was like the Otis Museum of Design or something, where she had all the plants and the plants were hooked up to the sensors. And then she had it so that that ran through a sound system. So you could actually hear the plants. And she, and this was, I found this was fascinating, that apparently if you went up to the plant with a pair of scissors with the intention of cutting it, that that would register, and you could
Mhm.
hear a shift. But what she also discovered is that if you went up to the plant with that pair of scissors, but you had no intention of cutting it, the sound wouldn't change, as if the plant could read our intentions.
Yeah, so it's telepathic. And
Yeah.
this study with the telepathy tapes that just came
Mm,
out with autistic kids, I don't know. I think I've been telepathic with the trees
yeah.
and some of the stuff, I don't offhand remember one right now, but some of the stuff that they've told me or shown me or I've had an idea, it has later happened,
Mm,
which I don't
mm,
know how that knowing even exists, but I do have one example. It was a little smoky in the air one day, and I knew we had no fires in
yeah.
California then. And I was smelling smoke, and I thought that's weird. And so I'm sitting with this tree, and I'm wondering where the smoke comes from. And in my head floats Siberia. And I'm
Oh,
thinking,
yeah.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
Siberia. But I went home and Googled it and found out that smoke was had just begun to hit the West Coast that
Mm,
day, and it was coming all the way from the fires in Siberia. And I went, whoa. So the trees
yeah.
knew, and I don't know how they knew. Or
Yeah.
they connected me to the unified field that knew. And that's the
Yeah.
other thing. I think these old trees do act as conductors for energy and intelligence. So I'm not sure sometimes if it's the tree that knows or if it's the tree connecting me to the larger field where that information is.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and also kind of tagging onto something that you had just said in terms of the kind of the plants spontaneously growing. And I thought you were going to say that the plants were going to start speaking, I mean, in a sense, saying, well, take this herb, take that herb. But it's a story that's been repeated a lot. I first heard it from Terence McKenna about the shamans in South and Central America, that the ayahuasqueros who make ayahuasca, because that's two different plants and they have to be brewed together in order to get the ayahuasca. And when the shamans were asked, well, how did you know? Because when you're talking about the rainforest, there's what, tens of thousands of plants. So how did you know to take these two specific plants that aren't like growing right next to each other to create this? And their response was, well, the plants told us.
Yeah.
And I've also read later that it wasn't necessarily those specific plants, but for the shaman, it was tobacco. Tobacco is what told them to do this. So
Hmm.
another plant teacher is like, here's what you need to do.
You know, this is a little bit unrelated, but it goes back to when we were talking about the divine feminine. And I think in a lot of ways, our distortions, our cultural distortions have profaned the sacred. Because
Yeah.
interesting, tobacco is so sacred to Native Americans, but then we turned it into this addictive thing that people get really sick from instead of a sacred, holy thing used in ceremonies. And we've done the same thing with sexuality, which can
Mm.
expand consciousness and connect and, bring two people as close as it's possible to become.
Yeah.
And instead, we have this big porn industry. It's like a lot of the things that are used for harm right now are actually really sacred.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I had this experience. I was a little bit further afield, but based on what you were just saying, I was teaching a class recently. Oh, it was about a year, 2 years ago now, I think, almost. And we were. It was the course was ecology, economy, and Christ, and it was at a Jesuit university. And one of the books that I had students read was Bell Hooks, her book Belonging, which is mostly essays, just sort of short
Mhm.
essays. And she had moved back to her original home of Kentucky. And she was writing about tobacco and how her grandparents worked in the fields, kind of growing and harvesting the tobacco. And at the end of the day, they would take a moment, they kind of like roll their own cigarette and, have that. But it wasn't like an addiction where they were going out and buying their packs of, whatever brand. And I remember trying to have a conversation with students about the plants and tobacco and how we've taken things from indigenous cultures and exploit them, and the end result is addiction or
Mhm.
something even worse. And it was really interesting because I asked them, I'm like, well, can you think of anything else that's happened to? And we got into this conversation, but because one student immediately is like, oh, cannabis, cannabis. And I got an email after that class from a student who was like, I think you're encouraging us to take drugs. And that's not good. And I'm like, no, no, that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm trying to present, there's this different worldview. Plants can be healing. Maybe there's a consciousness to the plants. But one of the things that kind of came up for me was also, it's like, well, what does it actually say? Because one of the things that Bell Hooks talks a lot about in her book is white supremacy. And I'm like, what does it say when we say, these people in indigenous cultures that have been using tobacco or using cannabis or taking ayahuasca, that's bad. And it's like, isn't there kind of this with the plants and the people, the indigenous communities that are using them, that we have this automatic implication that they're bad?
Mhm.
When it's like, where do you actually think that's coming from? And so I think
Mhm.
that's something that's also kind of we woven throughout all of this. So sorry, I kind of took it
No,
in a
I
different
love that.
direction,
That
but
was
it's something that
fascinating. It's
kind of
really
came up for me.
interesting because
Yeah.
so much, it isn't off track for our conversation because so much of what we're talking about is balance.
Mm,
And
yeah.
nature does know balance. Any ecosystem has this incredibly intricate balance where every little insect is part of the whole
Yeah.
health of that ecology. And one of our big problems in this stage of Western culture is we've really lost our balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've lost our balance and we've lost this sort of communion. We've separated ourselves. And
Mhm.
I like in the book, you had this example of the salmon and the role that trees play with fish, that fish need trees. And we never stop to think that fish need trees.
Mm. Well, it's a beautiful cycle because the salmon go up to where they were born on the rivers and creeks to spawn again. The trees shade those deep pools to keep them cool enough for the salmon to spawn. After they spawn, the salmon die, and they feed the trees the nutrients of their body that they need, the nitrogen and phosphorus. And then in the cycle on the other way, the salmon feed the orcas. So
Mm.
it's all so tied together.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it is, and I think that's our great sin is that sin of separation where we've tried to divorce ourselves out of that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this leads me into a little bit with the AI thing because there's so much fascination with this tool for artificial intelligence that we humans have invented. So it's
Mm-hmm.
an extrapolation of us, but it's
Mm-hmm.
fast. It can put together the knowledge of every PhD on any subject just like that. So
Yeah.
it's a good tool, but it's disembodied. And we go
Mm-hmm.
further down this rabbit hole of disembodied on a track that humans created that's going to take us further into a human style of thinking. And the balance, we're back to balance. The balance to that, I think, is for people to spend some time consciously connecting with Earth and that larger organic whole. Our bodies pick up something like 11 trillion bits of information every second or something, and
Wow.
only a few make it to consciousness. And so our bodies are already nature. We have nature right here in our
Mm-hmm.
bodies. And we don't want to get so disembodied that we lose touch with organic life.
All right. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and that's something I've been kind of thinking about the past few weeks. Is that there's all these conversations about AI and whether AI is self-aware or conscious, and I was thinking, I'm like, but AI can't smell a rose.
Exactly.
It can't touch the petals. It can't hear bird song.
Yeah.
And so much of our consciousness is in, we like to think of it just, kind of brain stuff, but it's like, but so much of it is embedded in sensual experience. And what kind of sensual experience can AI have? It can't.
Right.
It's just in this, I don't know, void of some sorts.
And so that is the antidote. For us to keep our balance, we need to come
Yeah,
back to our senses and
yeah,
really and that's why I think of beauty as a goddess, and nature
yeah,
is beautiful in myriad
hmm,
forms. So
yeah,
whatever form is close to your home or draws you, you can go and you can open all the senses. And not only the five senses that we know so well, although I think smell is kind of atrophied, and I really notice that with the laundry
mm,
detergents people are using, they're toxic. They
mm,
smell for half an hour after somebody walks by.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but basically, we can open back up to those senses. And then also, as we do so, the more subtle senses awaken and open up of intuition and
mm,
instinct and vision and all the clairs, etc.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
what we can do that no machine can do is the
yeah.
senses.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know that AI has any kind of intuition at all. So,
It probably
but
can
yes,
extrapolate probabilities because that's
yeah,
intellectual.
yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
that's different than intuition, yes.
Yeah, it's different than that gut feeling because it has no gut.
Yeah, there's that too. And it doesn't have the microbiome. We're not just us. We're a
Right.
whole community. Our bodies are a community of life that includes all this bacteria and all these
Mm-hmm.
different beings that live within us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I know that we've gone over a little bit around our hour time. I'm very much enjoying the conversation, but let me ask you, what are you working on next? What do you have coming up?
Um, a lot of my energy's been actually going into interviews and promoting the book at the moment,
Yeah.
but what is actually brewing in me right now is sort of, I've written some children's eco fantasies, and I actually have an adult one that's brewing.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of my problems as a writer, you're supposed to brand yourself and stay in the same niche, and I can't do it. It's
Yeah.
not how I am wired. So I've done fiction and nonfiction children's picture books and middle grade fantasy and young adult fantasy. Then I was in the forest and this book wanted to be written.
Mm.
And so I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to go, but that's the one that keeps popping into my imagination.
Okay. All right. And where can people go to find out more about you and your work? Do you have a web page or social media?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's just www.ellenddavidson.com. That's ELLENDEE, Davidson, DAVIDSON.com. And then that has all the other
Okay.
information.
All right. Do you have any other writings up there? Do you
Oh,
ever do
yeah.
like just articles? Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes do blog stuff and I have articles. I have a few articles I've posted, more coming, and
Okay.
interviews and all kinds of stuff. So, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I enjoyed your book, and it was something that I could relate to. Like I said, I went through this process of going out to I went to a canyon every week for about 11 years, and I miss it. I miss it. So I'm trying to find a Friday office here. But Ellen, thank you so much for the book and for the work you're doing and for the conversation. I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. This was fun. So
Okay.
I hope listeners enjoy it too.
Yeah, yeah. I think they will. I think they will. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Have a great day.
You too. It's a wrap on episode 203 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're part of my YouTube audience. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. You can also follow Rebel Spirit Radio on whatever audio platform you use for listening to podcasts. Right now, I have over 20,000 downloads on the audio platforms, yet I only have 13 followers, and one of those is me. It only takes a second to like, follow, or subscribe. It's totally free, and it really does help. Putting together this podcast is a labor of love. I do love it, but it is a lot of labor. So if you find value in the conversations I provide here, I hope you can find it in your heart to send a little of my way. With more subscribers and followers, I could possibly get some sponsorship, and honestly, having some funds come my way to help with equipment, hosting, and other necessary subscriptions would be really helpful. You can also help by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/rebelspirit. The link is also in the episode description. You can also purchase a super thanks on YouTube to help support my work. As I always like to say, I'm on the front range now doing missionary work in regards to religion, spirituality and ecology, consciousness, the esoteric, and how all of this can help us heal humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. So if you feel moved by the rebel spirit, and I sure hope that you do, then please, by all means, help me in my efforts to share the good news. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to or watching Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.